Kylie shortly. So if he arrives a little bit late, both to the guest speaker slot, we'll just go on and do the other stuff until he arrives. But I know he's en route, so hopefully he'll have safe travels and be here shortly. So with that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And if we could have each member of our leadership team who's present this evening, please introduce yourself and explain what your role is.
Yeah, I'm Michael Lilienthal, the Deputy Chief of the Dorado Hills Fire Department, and I represent the public safety group here. My goal is to network any issues our community has with either the sheriff or the CHP or the fire department, depending on whose jurisdiction on the issue.
I'm John Davey. I'm the chair of the Dorado Hills APAC, and we have residents that volunteer to examine development projects that are proposed in Dorado Hills and provide resident feedback to the county.
I'm Richard Ross. I focus on the concept of good governance and what it means and how it impacts on it.
And I'm John Heidel, the District 1 Supervisor.
I'm Cindy Munn, Supervisor Heidel's assistant. I do the community information and outreach for this.
So we are absent 3 of our normal members. John Vania covers infrastructure. I talked to him this morning, as did John Davey. He's on Maui having a really difficult time trying to accommodate the beach and everything else going on. So he's down in Waialua, so we'll have sympathies for him over the evening. Glenn Krakow, who does our economic development, he's not able to be here this evening. He's having some personal health issues and fighting that, trying to get healthy and come back. So we look forward to that in the future. And then Dr. Josh Elder, who does our healthy communities. He has so many things going on in his life. He's a military reserve, and he got called up for 4 months of service, so he's getting prepared to deploy. I think it was Iraq, is what they were talking about. So he's going to be gone for 4 months for Iraq. He's an emergency medical doctor at UC Davis, so I'm sure in his call-up he'll be providing emergency medical services to our military that are over there. So he's going to be in a safer position than a lot of other U.S. troops and stuff that are over there. But it's a high-risk area. So our prayers and thoughts go out for Josh when he gets deployed in his 4 months, and then he'll rejoin us hopefully in full spirit and bring it back on board. So with that, I would like to also recognize any other District 1 commissioners or committee members who are here present. And Raylene, if you just introduce yourself and tell us what your role is, appreciate it.
I'm Raylene Mann, and I'm commissioner on aging, and I'm John Heidel's appointee to that commission.
Okay, and Don Disler?
Don Nystrup. I'm vice chairperson for the El Dorado County Solid Waste Advisory Committee.
So is there anybody else who's on one of our volunteer committee or commissions that I didn't see come in? Okay, so we covered the base there. So yeah, Assemblyman Kylie has arrived. Excellent. Right on time. Yeah, thank you. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to item 2, adoption of the regular meeting agenda. Does anyone on the leadership committee have any proposed changes? Okay, seeing none, we're going to accept the agenda as submitted. Public comment. This is the opportunity we always want to provide for anyone who's present in the audience this evening to come forward and please speak in the microphone. Identify yourself if you would. We'd like to know who's speaking so we can record in the minutes properly. And then talk to the subject, whatever it may be. If you have a concern, an issue, you've made an observation, whatever it is, this is the time that's open public comment for things that are not on the agenda. So we'll cover the things on the agenda when we get to that. But open public comment, does anybody have any comments they'd like to make at this time?
Tim White, El Dorado Hills resident. As you know, I get a lot of communication from the county. 2 things came to my attention today. One is the total compensation market data for the Board of Supervisors position. And I see that our supervisors make an average of $8,330 a month. They've compared it to 9 other boards of supervisors, comparative ones in the state of California. And apparently you guys are undercompensated by 9.42%. I guess the recommendation would be you brought up to an average of $9,300 or so a month. I understand.
And that's total compensation. That isn't just
total compensation, salary, health
benefits,
benefits, everything else. It's an average. I am a little concerned. You guys are our leaders, and I appreciate that. I know you all work very hard, and I'm sure you're worthy of the compensation. However, I do want to recommend that you guys maybe take this and put it in the received and file folder and not act on it. You are public servants, you're leaders. I think we all know that the county has unfunded pension liabilities, a huge amount, We also have deferred maintenance all over on equipment, on roads, and everything else. Set an example, and even though it's personally hurtful to you, just say, you know what, we are not going to accept any recommendation of a pay raise on behalf of the 5 members of the Board of Supervisors. Overall, it's less than $45,000 a year. That would probably pay 250 feet of striping on a road, because that's expensive, I understand, but it's the example that you're going to be showing.
Right.
Second item that came up today is the compensation agreement, the memorandum of agreement for Don Ashton, the county chief administrative officer.
Yeah.
And I like Don. He does a tremendous amount of good work. I think he's a valuable asset to the Board of Supervisors and the county as a whole. He's hardworking. He understands the issues. It's a 4-year term, and I got that. But it does have a couple of unusual provisions.
Well, the
in
contract
it.
is not really a term. Right?
It's an at-will contract, but it's a 4-year term, but at will.
Yeah.
And it renews every year, so the anniversary keeps rolling over. It's like one of those football coaches. Every year it goes on in perpetuity, if you would. His compensation is $237,000 and change. He has a severance provision, even though it is at will. If the a future Board of Supervisors decide they want to get rid of him, he's got an 18 months severance. So if they terminate him, again, without cause, I'm not going to do anything wrong, but if they just don't want him, that's going to cost the county $355,000. I really think that's an excessive amount, even for a good person like him. I really think the Board of Supervisors, even though this contract has probably been negotiated between Mr. Ashton and his representatives and the county council on behalf of the Board of Supervisors, I really think you have to look at that number, because that to me is an excessive compensation for someone the future Board of Supervisors has decided they do not want to work with for whatever reason, and that's, to me, is just a huge amount of money, again, given what the county is looking for in its future financial deficits. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Yep. So I have some information I'll share with you later that kind of presents the other side of the story, because there's a lot of, as you might expect, history to some of these things, but I'm not going to belabor that here. So any other public comment? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to our guest speaker. Our speaker this evening is Assemblyman Kevin Kiley, and we've asked him to share some of his thoughts on legislative goals for the current year. I did identify 2 things on the agenda. One, I know he's very much involved with the AB5, the independent contractors legislation, and what that's doing to a lot of small businesses and private enterprises, so Kevin will certainly be able to speak to that. The other was SB 50, which is on the Senate side, but that's been something we've discussed several times at APAC, and there was a recent decision not to proceed with that, and I think that's favorable. This is the 3rd year SB 50. It's been out there in some refined form, and it may continue. But I just wanted the Assemblyman to just touch bases on what his thoughts are on that for the future, because I know something's ultimately going to get voted in, is what level the local communities, i.e. the counties and cities, have to take that mandate and then try to work with it to the best ability with respect to infrastructure needs. So with those 2 as we kind of highlight, I'd like to introduce Kevin Kiley. Kevin, you can come up here and speak if you'd like, or
sure. Okay, this works.
We'll give you a microphone too. First class operation, right?
Oh, wow. All right, testing. Thanks for having me, Supervisor. Good to be here. It's been, what, a couple years maybe?
Yeah, I think it's been 2 years.
Since I was,
maybe a little over.
I feel like we're talking about the gas tax last
Yes,
time.
SB1, which we all know about.
2017 story, SB1, right. It's good to be here. And I appreciate Supervisor Heidel's friendship and partnership and tremendous service to the people here of El Dorado County, and look forward to that continuing. So the legislature is back in session. We have, we've been back for a few weeks. The legislature the citizens of California kind of get a break from us the last 2 months of the year. We adjourn in September and then come back in January. And when it's an even numbered year like it is now, we generally have some business left over from the prior year. So the first month of the year was basically dealing with all of the bills, such as the one that Supervisor Hiles mentioned, SB 50, that are left over from the last year. And now it's like we're at a little bit of a lull where all of that's been dispensed with, or at least it's out of its house of origin, and we're still then now kind of waiting for the bills that are being introduced for this year to wend their way through the process and get assigned to committee. So February is kind of when everyone's getting their own bills together, building coalitions, and then we start actually considering all of those bills in March. But an issue that John mentioned that's been a focus of a lot of my attention lately is the aftermath of this bill AB5 that passed on the very last day of our session, September 15th last year, and went into effect at the beginning of 2020. And in brief, what this bill does is it has banned most forms of being an independent contractor in California. It has, in a very short span of time, put many, many, many people in our state out of work, has completely destroyed the livelihood of tens of thousands of people probably, and the number is growing every day. I've continued to collect or add to a list of the number of professions that have been impacted, when it's added up to over 150 by this point, people who are no longer able to work in California because of this law, because we're talking about freelancers, gig economy workers, entrepreneurs, folks who are not an employee of someone else, but are kind of their own boss on their own schedule and then contract with others in order to provide their service. And so you have a lot of people like freelance writers, you have people who are like court reporters or translators and interpreters or artists and photographers and cartoonists and some types of nurses like nurse practitioners, nurse anesthetists. And list goes on and on and on. And this bill was heavily pushed by the most dominant special interests in the Capitol, and that's the big labor union conglomerates. It was really targeted at the likes of Uber and Lyft, wanting to turn them all into shift workers. And regardless of whether or not you think that's a good idea, as it's happened, it's just locked in basically everyone else. I mean, we've got over 2 million people in California who work as independent contractors, and that this could ultimately affect. I should add that the bill did carve out a handful of exceptions. If you had a good enough lobbyist, you could make it so this law doesn't apply to you. So there are a few professions that are exempt from it and are subject to the old rules that have been around for a long time that people have gotten used to and that make a lot of sense, as opposed to this new bill, which is basically makes everyone an employee, except in some fairly limited circumstances. So in any case, a few of the things I've been doing, I've been leading an effort to repeal this law and and restore the livelihoods and what we're calling the right to earn a living for people in California. It's just a basic form of economic freedom, of freedom itself, is the ability to practice your profession, practice your craft, earn a livelihood, provide for your family. The state's just come away and taken that away from so many people. So I've introduced a bill. It's Assembly Bill 1938, and this is a full repeal of AB5. And it's urgency legislation, which means it would take effect right away. For your typical bill, when it gets signed, it waits till the next year until it takes effect. This is an urgency bill, so the moment the governor's signature is still wet, that would be enforceable, and it would be the new law of the land. It would be back to the traditional standard for independent contracting. In support of this effort, we have compiled a book of AB5 stories, as we're calling it. So people have been sending us testimonials about how this has completely destroyed their livelihood, how they've had to shut their business down, how they can no longer get work as a writer or an artist, whatever the case may be, how they can no longer provide for their family, how they might be evicted from their apartment or become homeless or might have to leave California. I mean, the stories are really heart-wrenching, and it's just one after another after another. So we compended a selection of these into a 200-page book, and I gave a copy to every single member of the legislature. And this is a completely nonpartisan issue in my eye, because it's actually, I'm a Republican, it's mostly fairly progressive people who are impacted by this, who are freelance writers or those sort of folks, and so we're trying to build a bipartisan coalition to roll this back, because at this point, basically everyone recognizes that there are at least some problems. So we also had a big rally last week at the Capitol that took place on the West Steps, and we had people from over for California County. There were over 300 people in attendance. Not bad for 10 a.m. On a Tuesday when it's pretty darn cold out. But we had several speakers who have been impacted by the law in the different professions that I mentioned. We had a best-selling author, we had a Broadway performer, we had a big-time Hollywood-type producer, independent film producer, who spoke, and then people went in and found their legislator and met with them afterwards. So in a sign that our effort here is building momentum, just today, the other side, the supporters or apologists of AB 5, the big unions, summoned a sort of lightly attended event of their own to come into the Capitol to lobby people. And this is a little unusual. I think it's the first time I've ever seen a group that does a big lobby day for a bill that is already passed. You know, usually you've won at that point. It's over. The bill is law. But I think they recognize that this thing is on real shaky ground, and momentum is building to repeal it. And so my goal right now is just to keep up the pressure. Every day we're trying to get people to make sure they're contacting their representative. For most of you, that's me, so you're good, you're covered. But to make sure that they understand what's going on and will vote in favor of this repeal. So that's where we're at with AB 5. Few other things I'm working on. I know that the homelessness issue has been one that the supervisor and others in the county have been very focused on. It's also one that the governor and some in state government are sort of now suddenly concerned about without necessarily having cared too much about it in the past. But the governor has been out doing sort of a traveling, fact-finding mission where he's going to homeless shelters and the like, and is trying to make it clear this is a big priority of his. Indeed, he's even proposed $1 billion more spending to combat homelessness in the budget. Now, my question is, well, what's been happening to all the money we're already putting there? I'm not necessarily opposed to spending more on homelessness. It's a huge problem, one of the biggest problems facing the state, and it's a national disgrace, to be honest with you, the homeless situation in California. I mean, we have half of the unsheltered homeless in the whole country here in California. And over the last 2 years, we've added $2.7 billion more to the overall amount we spend to combat homelessness. And in that span, actually in half that span, just in the last year, homelessness has risen by 16% in California, while it's declined in most other states. So if you measure the overall change in the homelessness rate in the United States, it actually went up a bit this last year, but you take California out of the equation, and it went down. So clearly something is happening here that is out of step with what's happening in the rest of the country, and all of this additional money we're pouring on the problem isn't doing any good, and maybe it's even making things worse. So what I've proposed is an audit of all of this homelessness spending, which is something, it's an official audit request, something that you can do as a legislator. You can do a bill or a resolution or something like that. You can also do an audit request, which is a request for the state auditor, Elaine Powell, actually a resident of El Dorado Hills, to go and conduct an audit report, which will then include recommendations. And so on February 26th, I believe it is, my audit request will be heard before what's called the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, which is the one joint Assembly Senate committee that there is in the legislature. So there's it's like your typical committee for any policy area, but it's both houses, and they're voting not on a particular piece of legislation, but on whether to authorize the audit. So if that is in fact approved, then we're going to get a report on, okay, this $2.7 billion and all of the pre-existing money, where exactly has it been going? What sort of things is it being used for? What are we doing to measure the impact of that spending? What sort of metrics do we have? What knowledge are we collecting about whether this is actually helping to transition people out of homelessness? How is it improving or aiding our efforts to provide mental health counseling or drug addiction treatment or any of the other forms of services or housing assistance that can actually help us solve the problem? And I think this ought to be a bipartisan thing as well, because if the governor is making homelessness a priority, then I think that this audit will provide a foundation for how we can best use additional resources going forward and do something about this problem that's become a major threat to the quality of our communities, not to mention a human tragedy. I mean, we've got, 150,000 homeless in California. You had 5,000, or over 1,000 people who died on the streets of Los Angeles last year. I mean, this is something that has become something that should never happen in a state like ours that has more wealth than every country in the world except for 4 of them, and yet we have this going on in our streets. I think it's just a very prominent and poignant example of how we've been failing as a state in a lot of ways, because it's a lot of toxic policies around mental health treatment and law enforcement and drug addiction treatment and housing that come together to produce this crisis. So that's another thing. The whole PG&E mess continues to be a dominant issue at the Capitol. I'm going to be announcing some legislation pretty soon that's designed to provide a greater level of accountability and try to free the legislature from the grip of PG&E, which has been a big part of the problem over the years, is that PG&E has just had has basically captured the legislature in a lot of ways and has gotten its way, and has, as a result, not provided the needed investments in safety and infrastructure that might have stopped some of these tragedies from happening, as well as, of course, the aftermath of blackouts and everything else that we've had to deal with. SB 50 is dead for the year. That's a housing bill that would have eased zoning in certain areas of the state. Frankly, it wouldn't have had a big impact on this county, as there was an exemption, at least for most of the bill's provisions, for smaller counties under 600,000 people, and the bulk of its impact, even in the larger counties, would be concentrated around major transit hubs, which there aren't a lot of here. So that bill is dead, though. It failed on the floor of the Assembly, or of the Senate, mainly as a result of a kind of revolt by the entire Los Angeles Senate delegation, all but one of whom voted against or abstained on the bill. Now, the conversation is by no means over. Housing continues to be a major issue facing the state, with housing prices well beyond anything else, any other state in the country. And the governor has suggested he wants to see a major housing production bill on his desk by the end of the year. The author of that bill, SB 50, has already put in a couple things that might develop into similar efforts. So that's kind of a stay tuned effort, stay tuned situation. As I mentioned at the outset, every bill that was left over from last year had to be dispensed with by the end of January, and so SB 50 was one of those. But now we've got a whole new, cohort of bills that's coming in. So we'll see how things look as that develops. Do you have any other questions, John? We can open up to folks.
Fire insurance. Insurance Commissioner Laura, have you made any progress in terms of looking at what legislation can happen there to help rural counties?
Yes, good question, and we do. We have a bill we're about to introduce. Okay, I'll tell you what it is, but don't tell anyone, because we haven't announced it. It's not official. We're looking to provide some tax relief to folks who have been impacted by these huge premium increases in parts of the state like ours. And so it'll be probably a refundable credit, which is designed to make you whole for this big shock to the system, which is really something that was beyond your control. And we've been in contact with Commissioner Laura's office on potentially supporting something like that. He's kind of gone off and done some things of his own that I didn't actually see coming, like just prohibit non-renewals and that sort of thing in areas that were directly affected by the fires, not necessarily this county. But that we will be rolling out here within the next week or two, I think.
Okay. Any other questions from anybody for the Assemblyman? Yes.
I think Measure E is asking for $15 million for educational types of costs.
Right, that's a school bond for rescue, you're saying?
Right, okay. Well, I guess my question is, I understand the state has a $21 billion excess or surplus. So how do you, or is there an explanation for why they should go forward with this rather than looking at the general fund for part of this cost?
Well, so the Measure E is a measure being proposed by one small school district in El Dorado County. So, wait, is E the one for Oak Ridge or for Rescue? I don't know.
A is Oak Ridge.
A is Oak Ridge, E is, okay.
Prop 13 is the bond.
Right. So that's, now are you talking about the state bond?
Yeah.
Okay, so then there's also a bond being put forward by the state that people will be voting on very soon, maybe today, right? We're talking about. And so that is for theoretically the whole state, and it can encompass pre-K, K through 12, as well as higher education, and it's focused on facilities, much like these local malls. So your question is, well, why don't we use some of the surplus money that we've got and that sort of thing, rather than further indebting ourselves? Very fair question. One answer is that that's just never what the people who are in the majority in Sacramento seem to want to do. We continue to just increase our level of indebtedness, and that actually results in a larger share of our general fund budget going toward just paying service on that debt as it continues to grow. Now, I will say that I'm a little more sympathetic to this bond than maybe some other proposals around education, because we do know at least that money towards facilities does some good. And we do have a lot of facilities in this state that are not in great shape, particularly in higher ed. They've got all manner of deferred maintenance on some of their campuses, where, when you look at just general spending on education, we've increased that by $40 billion or so over the last 7 years, and we don't see it making a big difference. I will finally add one thing the governor did in last year's budget that some viewed as a little bit helpful, was he did take some of the surplus, which it was $21 billion or so last year. I think it's in the high single digits this year. But he took some of that and actually gave school districts some help in making their CalPERS and CalSTRS payments. So that was, in a sense, using money from the surplus to pay down debt, and in a way that actually freed up our local jurisdictions to stop having to crowd out their general fund with these pension obligations. I'm not sure it's going to pass. Polling seems a little bit 50-50 at this point. But I think that it's whether or not that passes, the facilities issues are continue to be significant in a lot of districts, and so you're going to continue to see local measures like Measure A and Measure E here in this county.
Everyone, Ron?
Hi, Ron Cassidy with Bridlewood Canyon. I have a question about the homelessness here in the county. Are there any groups that you're aligned with here in the county that you're working closely with to help the situation?
Yes, there's a lot of, there's some really good nonprofits in the area. I know Heart is, they operate in Folsom. Are they here as well?
No, they're not. They're not in El Dorado County. They're in Sacramento County.
Yeah, they're close, and they have a couple other locations. And the ones I work with are a little more in classroom. What are some of the others here in El Dorado?
Well, the one that's in El Dorado County is El Dorado Opportunity Knox, EDOC we call it, the continuing care. And there's a number of nonprofits involved with that, faith-based, the county representatives, the city of Placerville. So that's really our coalition to try to come up with a strategic plan to address the homelessness, and that's what we're waiting for now, is that strategic plan to be developed and then determine how to implement it, right? Who's going to implement it? But it's all about getting federal monies, the HUD monies, and then also trying to make sure that we get as much state benefit from what the governor's offered to help the homelessness. But what I would really like to see is that money come to the counties to solve the local issues, and without all the oversight and administration, how you need to run something in a large city, because that's not the world we live in. If we had a little less regulation and just more ability to provide services, I think you'd see return on investment. But that's difficult to do. So,
thank you.
Yeah. And the question about nonprofits is great as well, because I think that, if you give money to the counties, then they actually know who the ones are that are really on the ground and making an impact, and so they can potentially partner with them. And we should take advantage of that capacity where it exists, rather than having the state invent a whole new program that may or may not be effective.
Any other questions for the Assemblyman? Anybody up here?
Yes.
Okay.
On the law enforcement side, going back a little bit, when we had Proposition 47, which frankly I think was mislabeled as to what it would do versus what it really did. And I think there's a number of issues that have spun off of that. Some of the big ones has to do with how much of the state prison population has been relegated back to the county facilities, which is giving it to an entity that in some ways has less funding to address it, given the high labor demands it takes to hopefully have some impact on changing the life cycle of the people who populate our penal institutions. So in doing that, we have made it less likely that their lives will be improved
That's right.
under some kind of state guidance. So I think that's one of the problems. And then there have been some other incidental shoestrings on that, such as eliminating the legal ability to take DNA samples from people who are arrested, which have been proven to be invaluable in solving some long-term cold cases and other current horrendous crimes. The East Bay rapist being one of the kinds of examples where the value of DNA is hugely important, although that particular change in the law did not affect that circumstance. Is there any movement afoot to try to clean up the consequences that have kind of flowed out of that?
There is. There's another initiative likely to appear on the November ballot that would roll back some of the provisions of both Prop 47 and Prop 57, which also, imposed hardships on law enforcement. For folks who are unfamiliar with these initiatives, Prop 47 passed in 2014 downgraded a number of crimes that were previously felonies and made them into misdemeanors. For example, theft of anything under $950. That's why you have this sort of epidemic of retail thefts where people go in with calculators and even if they're caught, there's really nothing you can do. It's a slap on the wrist, not even worth bringing them in when the jails are over capacity. Also, it downgraded a lot of drug offenses from felonies to misdemeanors, even for Class A drugs like cocaine and heroin. This is not unrelated to the homelessness problem in a number of ways. Number one, we've just let a lot of people out of prison or jail who are early and are suddenly on the streets with no place to go. As you mentioned, in jails where a lot of them are shifted, also because of realignment, you don't have the full complement of rehabilitative services that we have or ought to have in our prisons. Thirdly, because now drug crimes don't have any real penalty attached to them, there's no leverage on the part of law enforcement and prosecutors to use the threat of a criminal prosecution to induce offenders to enter drug treatment programs. So you've actually seen vastly diminished participation in drug courts and other programs that help people fight addiction and actually get their lives turned around. I'll tell you an example of this is a while back, I think you were there too, Heidi, we went on a little ride-along with the county sheriff and met some of the homeless folks over in Cameron Park. And one of the officers pointed to me to a little trailer adjacent to there and said, "Oh yeah, that's their drug dealer. That's the guy who goes out there and sells the drugs." And then I asked a stupid question. I said, "Why don't you arrest him?" And of course, the answer is, "Well, we did, but there's nothing that we can do." He gets right back out and continues peddling drugs to the homeless folks here. So that's just a perfect example of how a really, really misguided state policy has really taken a lot of tools away from local law enforcement and helped contribute to the homelessness problem. But yes, look for this on your November ballot. Much to Jerry Brown's chagrin, he did everything he could to stop this thing from qualifying for the ballot. It looks like we will have a chance to vote on it in November.
So while we're on law enforcement, I have one final one to talk to you. We tragically lost one of our deputy sheriffs, Brian Ishmael, in basically responding to a call without recognizing what he was going into.
Right.
Sanctuary state, sanctuary city, sanctuary county, whatever keeps coming up. Do you know of any legislation that law enforcement is getting behind that? Because in talking with our local sheriff, he doesn't feel that's the right way to do it, for the county to take a position and try to support something at that level, but rather let the federal agencies, the federal government, deal with it. And that's the way he was approaching it when I talked to him the last time, and maybe there's an update to that. But do you have any thoughts on what's going on in the legislature relative to trying to change those kinds of provisions?
Yeah, I wish I could say something was going to happen on this, but I think it's extremely unlikely and really tragic. I mean, I understand from District Attorney Vern Pearson and the U.S. Attorney McGregor Scott that in the case of Deputy Ishmael's murder, there actually was, because of the sanctuary state law, a somewhat limited ability to communicate with federal authorities during the critical moments immediately after the crime, which in this case they still managed to catch them, but it could very well have provided a critical window for them to cross the border and be beyond the reach of law enforcement. So it's just thankfully we were able to get the guys in this case, but it's there are many stories like this. The sanctuary state bill was always fully political. It was never even attempted to be justified as good policy. It doesn't apply to someone who's a undocumented immigrant unless they've committed an actual criminal offense. That's something that there's a lot of confusion about. Something this is a way to just help anyone who's in the country illegally. No, it's specifically targeted only at criminal undocumented immigrants, which is the one group there's always been a bipartisan consensus to say that these are the folks that immigration enforcement should focus on. And this whole thing has put, law enforcement in counties in a terrible predicament because you have what, in my view, is a conflict between state and federal law. To really answer your question in a broader way, I do think you're going to see this go to the U.S. Supreme Court at some point. It has been considered by a district court within the Ninth Circuit. They upheld the constitutionality of sanctuary state. So it's going to take a while to percolate through the court system. But I could readily imagine this case being taken up by the U.S. Supreme Court and being struck down under the supremacy clause and federal preemption. But this is something that counties. I feel like you're in a tough position because most people would look at it and say, well, you have a conflict between state and federal law, why don't you just choose federal law? Not understanding that there's a different relationship between county and state than there is between county and the federal government. You don't really just get to choose, right? It'd be nice if you did, but that's just one of the many things that was so misguided about this. It was a response to the 2016 election. It was pushed through over the overwhelming objections of law enforcement, and it's led to a lot of very undesirable consequences.
So I know I, myself, and several other elected officials have committed our support to our sheriff, and whatever the sheriff thinks we need to do to proceed with this, whether it's going through Dr. McGregor and all that stuff, we're behind him 100% in getting something accomplished. But I don't think that trying to solve it at the state legislature is the right answer. There's people who think that we should take that position. I just don't see that as helping us along that path. So that's where my personal commitment is to our sheriff, and I know several others have heard them. You lead, we'll follow, but help us understand what we can do to support the cause and get it done right, so we don't have this happen in another county somewhere. Because this is like the third or fourth event in the last 3 years where a Jefferson sheriff, a police officer, whatever, was basically gunned down in a situation where we had people who weren't residents of the state or country, doing illegal immigrants, whatever you want to call it, making those crimes.
Yeah.
And I'm not against illegal immigrants. I mean, there's a place to deal with all those things. But when they're taking criminal actions and actually getting to the point of killing our law enforcement agencies, we've got to step up and do something. So I'm following the sheriff. Whatever he suggests, I'm going to give him my back and give him backing as much as I can to make sure that we proceed with whatever we can, with whatever influence we can have. But I just don't see it helping if we try to have a separate initiative at the county level. It just stirs the pot and creates a lot of friction with anxiety and friction with people because it isn't going to lead to anything. So it's just basically topical, but it's not solving anything. There's no solution there. But anyway, so that's my thoughts.
Are there some counties down south that are actually non-sanctuary counties? Or there were some counties that had actually said we are voted to be a non-sanctuary county?
Not quite. So you have counties that have passed resolutions of some sort or another, kind of calling on the legislature to take action. Now you also have, and I think that Sheriff D'Agostini is doing this to some extent. There have been some kind of creative workarounds, such as like posting information about releases in a publicly available format. That way, you're not communicating with the federal officials, but the information is in a place where they can go and see it. So that's probably the sort of thing that you're thinking about. I think it was Orange County that kind of pioneered that approach.
And I think one of the cities, basically a charter city, basically declared themselves a non-sanctuary city. And I think that was being challenged as well. But their charter city, which gives them unique capabilities per the state constitution that other normal cities don't have and counties certainly don't have. So that was another example of something that was interesting. But so there's a lot of different nuances to it. That's sure. Hopefully we'll find a path forward that's better than we've been in the past, but it's going to take some time. Any other final thoughts?
That question. There's a proposition dealing with an aspect of the old Prop 13.
Yes, there is.
And it seems to want to separate out different classes of property ownership. Two questions on that. First of all, if that were to pass, those additional funds from increased property assessments and taxes, where do those funds go?
Well, it would be revenue that's available to the state, and by constitutional mandate, 40+% of it would go to education.
But it would go to the general fund?
Yes.
So it would, at least 41% would go to the general.
Well, I'm sorry, that's not quite right. So this is, it would increase local property tax revenues. So a lot of it would, be divided up among different levels of government. But to the extent that it flows into the state's coffers, then yes, I believe it would be general fund. But even within general fund, Prop 98 mandates that the lion's share go to education.
Okay, the second part of my question is, if classes of property owners can be segregated like that, can other propositions which would further segregate classes of property owners be possible, such as people whose residences would be valued at more than $1 million could be separated from those at less than $1 million?
Oh, sure. I could easily.
So basically, you can begin to separate the classes of property owners, and in a sense, my word, not yours, pick them off one class at a time until nobody's protected by the old Proposition 13.
That could be done. As a matter of fact, there was just a bill introduced that seeks to cap the value of your home at which you can benefit from the state's version of the interest deduction, the mortgage interest deduction, and as well as for second residences. So I think your logic is quite apt. That the game is always to we'll start with the billionaires and millionaires. I mean, who really is going to feel sorry for them, and then erode the protections bit by bit. But frankly, if the law or the proposition challenging the old Prop 13, the one that we know and love, it is in this year seeking to exempt business properties. And so that's kind of what you're hearing from those who are in favor. Don't worry, it's not your home, it's just business properties. And frankly, it's bad enough when it's business properties because it's really small businesses that are going to feel pinched by this, and by extension, workers and consumers. But you do know what's going to happen next. Like, as soon as they get the business properties out, then it's on to the residences, and maybe they will do it bit by bit, like you just said. I actually haven't heard that proposed, but it's quite possible.
So one final thought. We all know the consequences of salt. Is there new organic pepper coming?
I haven't got that one to quite take off, but I still think it's a pretty darn good idea. Everyone at the Capitol, this was, I guess, in 2018, after the federal tax bill passed, and there's a lot of uproar about this state and local tax deduction being taken away, so that you could no longer claim when you're filing your federal taxes a deduction for what you pay in state taxes. And my colleagues on the other side of that, this is an assault on the middle class, and people are really going to suffer. And so I realized there was actually a way that we could reverse this and restore it for people. All you had to do was give people, when you're doing your state tax return, an opportunity to deduct your federal taxes. Because we can do that as a state. We don't need the federal government for that. And these are actually mathematically equivalent properties, whether you have a deduction for your state federal taxes and your state tax return, or a deduction for your state taxes and your federal tax return. And so I proposed this as a bill. And SALT, state and local tax deduction, is called SALT because it's an acronym. So we proposed the title of our bill, the Prosperous Economy and Pay Protection Through Equitable Rates Act, or PEPA. Unfortunately, it died in its first committee vote. We got a few votes for it, but couldn't get it all the way across.
Very good. Okay. Well, thank you, Kevin. I really appreciate the discussion.
All right. Thank you.
John, can I throw out two things?
Sure. Yeah, come up here to the microphone, though.
Don't hate me, Kevin.
Come up to the microphone, because then you can be heard as stuff for some people.
I'm Heidi Hanneman. I'm the district representative for Assemblyman Kiley. So if anyone needs anything, please reach out, because Kevin's usually at the Capitol. I'll leave some of my cards in the back. But the bill number, just because we have the press here, as I see Sal and I are taking minutes, the bill for AB5 is 1928, not 1938.
Oh.
And then on Monday, just he brought up Deputy Ishmael. His family is actually going to be at the Capitol, and Kevin and Assemblyman Bigelow are going to be honoring them in his memory on the floor. So if anyone wants to tune in, you can always watch that from your computer. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Heidi. Okay, it's always good to understand what's going on in the state capitol because the county, a lot of people don't recognize the county is the service arm of the state. So we are responsible for delivering municipal services at the local level that the state mandates to us. And oftentimes those mandates come without funding. So we struggle to figure out how we're going to do those things, but there's a very close connection between the state and the county, different from cities. Cities have a unique layer of definition within the government code as opposed to counties. So there's a huge difference that cities aren't obligated to accept municipal services from the state where the counties are. So really understanding the nuances associated with the way our state government's set up can help people to a better understanding of why we don't have the resources at the county level to do all the things we'd like to do. But I'm going to leave it at that. So I want to move on to item 5, supervisor communications, and just give you some quick updates on things. The Central Eldorado specific plan, i.e. the project behind Brayley's 98-acre golf course, and even beyond that, including Pedregal and other things. I think most of us know that there was a planning commission hearing here in Eldorado Hills, and there was a lot of public comment on that. One of the benefits of having that was that there was a result where Park Development Company said that they were willing to entertain discussions about the sale of the 98-acre golf site, and the Community Services District responded that they were interested in pursuing that. So there is discussions going on. I know Kevin, I saw him just a minute ago, and I know Alan's here too, but there's a letter that the CSD put out in terms of their plan. I think it's a 2-pager. So if you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to read that because that's the methods we're going to try to use to hopefully reach an agreement where this 98-acre, well-loved entryway to El Dorado County and El Dorado Hills can be preserved as open space recreational use by our local community in terms of developing parkland, in terms of developing ball diamonds, sports fields, community center, whatever it is we can actually fund. But acquiring land is the first thing that we have to do because that preserves it then as own property of the community as opposed to a private developer that could come back with another project sometime. So I'm extremely hopeful that that proceeds successfully and we're able to make that acquisition. But you'll hear more from the CSD as that process unveils. So I want to make sure people understood that. On the 24th of this month, we visited Mark Yallow's property. Some of you may recognize she came to last month's community council meeting. And so we actually did take a group of people, our planning commissioner, John Bain, and myself. We had several representatives from civil engineering firms, from various organizations. We actually looked at the property. There was a proposal for some compromise to try to resolve that issue. There was actually a follow-up meeting held at the county offices. It was on the 27th. But unfortunately, we weren't able to reach any progress in terms of a compromise. So I'm not sure where that's going to go. It's going to go to litigation or whatever. But I want everybody to know that we tried in earnest to try to find some solutions that would work for everybody involved. And it just wasn't doable. So we gave it our best. But I did meet my commitment to Margie, and I want people to recognize that. The Vineyards Project. We also had a site visit out there. The Board of Supervisors was considering that, and there was concerns over a density bonus prospect of the Vineyards Project, which essentially doubles the number of units, and what the benefit is of having a PD which set aside open space areas to include a vineyard and an oak blooms area versus the previous proposal. So we went out and did a site visit, so everybody that was willing to attend got to see firsthand what that site is actually like, and so that is going to come back to the Board of Supervisors. But from my perspective, it was important for decision makers and people involved to actually get out on the property to look at it. Because that's one thing I learned many years ago in APAC is you can look at a bunch of plans, but you really don't understand what's being proposed until you go out and walk the property. You really understand the features. Where are the drainage? How thick are the oaks? What are the size of the oak trees? Are we talking about heritage oaks? All of those things come into consideration when you really walk the property and observe what's out there as opposed to looking at a map. So I think that was extremely beneficial. And then lastly, at Saratoga Way, Iron Point Road, many people have been asking us when that's going to happen. We originally had the end of February as the target date that was given to us, and recently with conversations with Elliott Homes, I was told it's probably going to be the end of March now. So it seems like month by month it's moving out 30 days. Maybe they can pull that forward. I'm hoping they can, but I don't want to mislead people. It isn't going to happen the end of this month. So I'm hoping earlier in March than the end of March, but they are working on it, and so hopefully we'll just monitor that progress and sooner rather than later, that road will be opened, and I think it's a whole new paradigm in terms of people traveling to get down to Costco and La Borgata and all the facilities down here, instead of having to go down Highway 50 and come on off East Bidwell. We'll have essentially a backdoor entry into a lot of those businesses that are down in Folsom that many people frequent. So it really should alleviate the traffic on Highway 50 and somewhat alleviate the traffic on East Bidwell. But we have to monitor how much that traffic flow is and try to make sure it's consistent with the road widths and the improvements that are made. So there's more to learn once that road gets opened. Yeah, Tim?
Last time, or maybe it was 2 times ago, because they keep delaying it, LA Home said they requested delays to open it because of the safety of their workers. What is it that their workers are doing? I mean, I see them working on the hills, but how what they're doing up there would affect the safety
Well, they told me
workers?
they hadn't completed the road striping, and I don't know if that's true or not. I was getting this from their representative, and I haven't driven through there to look at whether or not all the striping is finished, all of the amenities on the side of the roadways are finished. But that's what they were telling me, was some of the stuff that hadn't been completed yet. So that seems like it's pretty quick to finish. But I've found that if you want a quality product, sometimes it just takes longer than try to force something artificially that ends up with less than desired results. So yeah, it's a 30-day extension, which is not the right answer, but I'd rather live with that and have it done right than not have it done. So, and they have some positions. I think they were going to actually come out with something that provided a better explanation of what they meant by safety. I've had that verbally, and I've asked for it in writing, but I haven't seen it in writing yet. So, but, I mean, they have their reasons, I guess, is the easiest way to put it. So, with that, any other thoughts anybody has on stuff going on in the county that I can share you a latest update or something that's going on? All right, seeing none, let's move on to our leadership team progress reports. And we normally start with public safety, so we both have both the CHP and the sheriff. So, Deputy Sheriff Morton, would you like to start?
Yes, sir. Hello, I'm Detective Morton. I work for the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. I'm a detective in property crimes in El Dorado Hills, so I handle all of the burglaries and thefts that occur in El Dorado Hills, which is my desk. So I have some quality of life stats from the past couple weeks. I wanted to just go over the January 16th through the 22nd. El Dorado Hills had a total of 15 cases, crime reports taken. However, those crime reports, those 15, there's a broad range. So probably about half of those are actually like theft or burglary crimes. That also includes, everything as far as, any kind of like 5150 type of calls that we get, corners cases and stuff like that. The following week, the 23rd through the 29th, we took a total of 5 cases, so a pretty significant drop. One of the cases I wanted to touch on. I mean, we continue to obviously deal with the burglaries and the thefts from vehicles. It's a kind of a constant thing. One thing that we had a theft from a business over here in the business park. A gentleman had a bunch of equipment, some equipment vandalized, and some of his equipment stolen. Luckily, with his help and him being, kind of observant, keeping an eye out, he was able to locate one of the items for sale on the internet. So we were able to, last week, we were able to go down there to North Sac and serve a search warrant and get his items back and get this guy taken to jail. So that was a good case that we had there. Shockingly, the suspect had a lengthy criminal history. And then I think the week before that, or a week or two before that, we had a rash of vehicle burglaries in the Bridlewood neighborhood. Luckily, we did get 3 individuals involved in that. They all went to jail. We got a lot of property back and back to the victims on that. So, but again, we deal with a lot of these cases and I can use 2 more detectives with me helping me out. Still probably won't be enough, but it's an uphill battle. But we continue to make progress, and I just again in the community just ask that keep your things out of your vehicles at night, and lock your doors, lock your vehicles up, and again any value ways take them out of the vehicles. So that's all from me.
Okay, any questions for the detective?
How's the new facility working?
It's working out really well.
Is it?
Yes, we're working out really well. To have everybody under one roof, we're able to. I feel like we're able to work a lot more effectively. If I have, a patrol takes a case down here in El Dorado Hills, that maybe there are some leads or something. There's some follow-up that can be done rather quickly. They can just come upstairs and see me and kind of tell me in person, hey, this is what's going on. Whereas before, I'm in a different building altogether across town, so that message might not get relayed as effectively. So it's just little things like that I've noticed that it really has helped out. So
Great, that's great. That's great.
thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Andrew, you want to go next?
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I have.
You're up.
If I have.
I'm Officer Andrew Brown. I'm the Public Information Officer / Community Resource Officer / whatever else needs to be done around the office. So today there's not too much to report. We didn't experience any maximum enforcement period. Unfortunately, Super Bowl isn't recognized as a maximum enforcement period for the state of California or the Highway Patrol. So we don't necessarily collect statistics over the holiday. It's not a holiday. For some it is.
It should be today, though, right?
Yeah, actually,
We're talking about state holiday today. What's wrong?
I mean, the Niners. Golly. So we didn't collect any statistics statewide for DUI arrests, traffic collisions, fatalities, and the like. But I can say for locally, we really didn't have that much of an uptick. We had full force out there and officers enforcing the roadways, education campaigns, videos, all the above. We really threw everything we had at it to just make sure, hey, the options are out there. DUI is not the answer. The options are out there to get yourself home or just stay where you're drinking. Funny story I heard from my brother yesterday, though. He says, hey, I couldn't get rid of that car seat. I had to throw it away. I said, what are you talking about? Car seat? You had to throw it away? He's like, yeah, it's been expired for 2 years and no one wants it. I said, you kidding me? No one wants an expired car seat. Really? So it just reminds me, as the car seat coordinator for our area and certified car seat installer for Safe Kids, I just want to encourage all of you here in El Dorado Hills and elsewhere in this county that the Highway Patrol offers a service where we can install your car seat, make sure it's in right if you have any doubts about it. Don't want to judge about the demographics of the room, but your grandkids maybe, if you don't know how to get that car seat in there, it is a difficult thing to do. And it's no joke, that's probably the number one demographic of persons that I install car seats for is for grandparents. And that's just the makeup of El Dorado County. They're complex, they're hard to get in many times, but I want to show you how to get it in there right. And I'll give you tips and anything that you need. Just call me up. You can look up my phone number on our Facebook page, or you can go just Google CHP Possible. It'll pop right up. I do them typically on Thursdays, but if you're extra nice, I might schedule it otherwise during the week. So I just like to promote that quite a bit because we've kind of actually had a downturn in installs. I'd like to get that back up. And if, say you show up with a car seat that doesn't quite work, we do have grant-funded car seats that are free, that we can replace what you have that doesn't work with something that does work. We just want to make sure it's for the babies, all right? So love them babies and get them in a good car seat. But otherwise, that's about all I have, and thank you very much. Any questions?
Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Do you install your brother's expired car seat?
I certainly do not. I know where he gets his car seats secondhand, and I lecture him every time. He's my older brother. I have to lecture him, so it's easy. It's easy. Yeah, no, didn't put that one in. I wouldn't have. I don't want to accept that liability. I have to indemnify myself somehow. I can't put that car seat in. It's expired.
I will make a comment on traffic safety because I understand I have family that came back from the Santa Cruz area during the Super Bowl game. They got home just before the game ended.
Yeah.
They said they've never had fewer cars on the road. Than those hours, it was like an empty freeway.
Agreed.
So if you got to go do something like that, that's the time to plan to come back.
Yeah.
Everybody else is at home watching the 49ers on TV.
My wife and my family, we transitioned houses at halftime when we were This is awesome.
Everybody's wanting down.
Yeah.
So,
any other questions, concerns for the highway patrol? I'm happy to serve you again. You can call me at any time if you have any traffic complaints, concerns. We'd like to directly address what you need, and we're happy to do it. All right, thank you.
thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it. Chief Lilly.
All right, Michael Williams again with the El Dorado Fire Department. Now, we do have some good traction going right now. The County of El Dorado has put an ordinance in place for vegetation management. A lot of Supervisor Heidel's help and others on our Board of Supervisors recognizing the threat. There is some revisions coming to that ordinance that the fire agencies are collaborating with the county. And essentially what we're trying to do is work together as one group, the county inspectors, the local fire agencies, and inspect as many properties in the county as we can. So that's positive momentum from our perspective. We're happy that it's moving forward. We're happy to collaborate on some of the changes and who can enforce the ordinance and what those abilities look like. So fire department is actively engaged in that. We're looking forward to that. And as you notice, it dried out the last couple of days. We got that dry wind. It's really cold and dry out there, and hopefully we'll get some more rain this year. Otherwise, it's going to be an interesting fire season coming up. So get your fuel reduction plan in place, and if you need help, a lot of county resources available. Call the fire department. I see Fire Safety Council. Steve Willis is here. They're doing tremendous work for the community and certainly have done a lot of fuel reduction in the area. So a lot of good resources out there for you. The other interesting thing is you'll see a construction project at Station 85, which is just down the street here on Wilson and El Dorado Hills Boulevard. And we have a Verizon cell tower going in on top of our existing tower. So hopefully we'll see some service enhancements for Verizon customers at least, and what is typically a kind of a dead cell spot in town. Other than that, any questions for the fire department?
Very good, thank you, Chief. Okay, let's start at the end of the table. Just
Run this line?
Yep.
Okay.
Here, you want this, John?
No, I'll talk about it.
Okay.
Nobody wants to hear anyway. So APAP, our meeting is next Wednesday at 7 p.m. in this room. We do have a guest speaker, and it's Dr. Ron Caruth. He's the superintendent of the El Dorado Union High School District. And we reached out to him because during this review of the Central El Dorado Pacific Line, a lot of people, me being one, Tim being one, Joe. Okay, so a lot of people were asking, hey, when the application comes in for a project, the county distributes it to a lot of agencies for feedback, initial feedback. And typically the school district and EID never have a problem with any development project. No problem. So, my perception personally is that, there's dollars associated with new students coming in with impact fees. So we reached out to Dr. Caruth and asked him if he would come and discuss how the district looks at these projects when they're proposed, how they consider them, what their metrics might be. And so he's willing to come and talk to us, and I think it's a good discussion to have because I think that we've talked, we talked about, hey, well, the board is the school boards aren't responding. And, I think it's hand in hand, it's the board and it's the staff, because the staff processes it. And the board, they get the reports and the information. But it'll be a good conversation to have, and he'll have some, I imagine he'll have something to say about Measure A, even though we asked him not to be overtly political about it, but I imagine he's going to talk about facilities and how those dollars are different than perhaps impact fee dollars from projects. So the other items on our agenda is pretty light. We have some reviews of the last few planning commission hearings, and I know Dick's going to talk about the planning commission hearing that was held here for Central at the beginning of the month. The one thing about Central is that they were supposed to, it's on the agenda for the planning commission for the February 13th meeting next week. However, the staff is recommending that it's being continued to March 26th. So, we thought the planning commission would have their review and their recommendations to the board in by the end of February, and it's being delayed. And the initial thing I had heard mentioned by a couple of different parties was that they were looking at some potential data for vehicle miles traveled, which is a different standard than, typically the county will look at level of service. So they might be looking to augment the information that they have for those LOS and traffic impact analysis with that VMP data. And I guess once it's in, we'll hear about how it may or may not impact the project. And the other thing we'll be looking at is a couple of things that the board of supervisors have made decisions on, or at least had some vision to. And then we're also going to look at sort of forecasts some of the projects that we're feeling that we're probably going to have before us coming up pretty soon. So what was it? The one other item was that at the board, the Serrano J7 appeal that was heard at the board earlier, staff's recommending that it was supposed to be tomorrow, right? That agenda item, the staff's also recommending that be continued to the February 11th board meeting. So
skip it 1 week, basically.
Yeah. So with that, if there's no other questions about APAC.
Yes, I have one. If during the different hearings, questions were asked of the planning commission staff, and also the board, if they bring new information forward or make proposed changes to what they have said they intend to do, is that new information available at a later time for public awareness and comment?
I think our experience is frequently we see in the planning commission meeting minutes, which is an audio recording, not a video. And there might be some written documentation. There might be some things added to Legistar. And unfortunately, some of the Legistar items, typically, they want to have them out the week before the hearing, 2 weeks before the hearings or the meetings. Sometimes they're added the day before. Sometimes they change, even though they have the same file number, the same file name. So it takes a bit of diligence to actually look. But no, to your question, I think it's a mixed bag. Sometimes those things, if they're significant, I think they get reviewed and open to the public. I know that the planning commission, after having 3 hearings already, I know that I spoke to Supervisor Ringa this morning from Hawaii. It's been a little bit.
Yeah.
That alarm goes up at 4:30. But I talked to him, and he's not opposed to if more information is available, that he would be open to having more hearings. I don't get a sense that the balance of the planning commission wants to do that. They've had 3 already, which is unusual for any project. They did, and he'll discuss, they did the hearing here in Dorado Hills was highly attended, a lot of information, a lot of public feedback. So, some things I think when they're significant, we hear about them beforehand. Sometimes I know they don't like to negotiate at the podium as they're discussing a project. I know a lot of applicants say, hey, but sometimes a project, if it's small, they'll say, well, yeah, we can do that. And it's sort of like almost a verbal or a handshake, but it has to be codified and written into like COAs. But as far as review, if it's decided at the planning commission, they decided then. Sometimes it happens at the board. There are changes at the podium when they're talking to the board of supervisors. So in a perfect world, we'd see it all the time. We'd all have thoughtful and thorough consideration of what's presented, but it's not real.
So the sausage being made.
Delicious sausage.
Just don't watch how it's being made, that's all.
So, and that's it for APAC, but we look forward to seeing you next week. We've had some high turnouts. We'd like to continue seeing that. And, we don't have a very full agenda, but with Dr. Cruz coming, I think it's sort of a compelling conversation and discussion to hear what he has to say.
So let me talk to the vehicle miles travel thing, because that's a new requirement that the state of California is imposing on all entities that do CEQA analysis, California Environmental Quality Act. So El Dorado County has adopted a level of service requirement relative to traffic. The state is now saying for CEQA purposes, for environmental purposes, you have to use a new methodology that looks into vehicles and miles traveled for the residents of a new proposed subdivision or whatever it may be. And that's to get an estimate of, okay, is this meeting the needs of the local populace or people having to drive a long distance to work? It's going to be very harmful to get positive indications from that VMT for rural counties to have certain types of developments. So that's changing our paradigm a little bit. The state has required that absolutely be applied by July of 2021. There's already been some preliminary court rulings. which is why our planning commission is suggesting, let's go back and take a little look at BMT just so we know we're on reasonably good ground with some of these projects and don't get surprised later on. So it's something that's coming. We decided, I guess, to take the initiative to do it earlier. The project proponents were willing to take that on so that didn't become an impediment. So that's part of it. But there's also two more elements have been added to CEQA. I think it was 17 elements before, now there's 19. The two that they've added are called wildfire, which means what are the safety provisions associated with wildfires associated in that area? Are there adequate evacuation routes? Are they doing tree management in terms of forest management services to keep the fuels down? So wildfire is a consideration now in environmental reviews. And the other one is energy. What is the energy consumption associated with these developments that are being proposed? Now the greenhouse gas laws drive you to a mandate that all new homes will be built with solar self-supported solar panels and solar units to power the homes. But they don't require batteries with those solar units. So if you have the PSPS issue that we've experienced in the past, it doesn't work for you. Even though you got solar panels, you're not going to be able to use them because that has to go into the grid. So unless you have a battery backup or some other energy storage device that you can put the energy from your solar panel into, when PG&E has their PSPSs, you're flat out of luck. So you have to make an additional investment in something. So, I mean, some people look at generators, some people look at the battery systems for their solar, whatever it is. But this is one of the continuing changes that California is experiencing. And unfortunately, all those regulatory issues, all those regulatory things increase the cost of housing. So on one side, we talk about we need more housing, we need affordable housing. On the other side, we talk about all the new regulations that are put in place. And well, the exterior landscaping ordinance in terms of water usage, that's just one more thing we have to do. It's an unfunded mandate. So now people are going to have to cut back on their planned irrigation for external landscape and that sort of thing. And that's going to be monitored. And then if it's not met, either the water purveyor or the county will be fined. And I mean, it just continues and continues to the point that it gets very difficult to find out how you can balance this. We need affordable housing, but we have all these additional regulations that add to the cost. So anyway, that's part of the.
I would. One more thing about the BMT is that I'm having a hard time. I'm just a volunteer, wrapping my head around. So here's this BMT standard, but the general plan of the county specifies level of service. So okay, if they sort of go hand in hand in parallel, there's no conflict. Okay, well there's no problem. But what if level of service is one thing and BMT says another?
And the answer is from a CEQA perspective, if you don't clear the BMT with proper mitigation, you're flat out of luck. But you also have to satisfy, if you're a proponent of a project now, the LOS laws that the state, it's part of the general plan. The state is walking away from those, but they're allowing the counties to continue with them. So they're not outruling those. They have overridden the county general plan that has level of service constraints on it. So we have to actually do two analysis within our planning department to make sure a project satisfies both to the best of our ability to analyze it. So. It's added cost, added regulation, or whatever you want to call it. So anyway, it makes it just that much more unaffordable when you try to buy a new home. So, okay.
Question.
Yes, Joel.
How do you determine the vehicle mile traveled of a veteran community that is not built yet when you don't know where they're going to be working?
That's an interesting question, and we've asked that type of question many times, which is why, in part, they wanted to do an analysis with this to get their feet wet in terms of how you do this for rural counties. I don't think it's a very precise science yet. I think it's all assumptions. You take a given development, you look at the jobs in a given area, and you look at where people are currently commuting to, and you come up with something. But that methodology is not clear to me what it means for a rural county. And even our planning department spent a lot of time looking at it. It's still not clear where we're going with all that. We've got consultants that are trying to help us do that analysis.
Yeah, and when you look at a specific
freight car of worms.
What was that?
It's a freight car of worms.
Yeah, it is.
Not just
but then you look at projects that are like a specific plan that are approved for 20 years, and here's what was happening 20 years ago when it was approved. Well, here's what we're looking at now. And the traffic impact analysis, to me, is always a rather subjective science art. Voodoo. So how you apply those things, a lot of that comes down to you have some sort of set metrics, but it's so subjective. I'm not charged with trying to decide those.
So I have my suspicions that the vehicle miles traveled is really an approach the state is using to figure out how to charge people directly for the amount of miles they travel with their long distance commuters. Because they can say, okay, this subdivision you're living in now is approved, here was the VMT mileage, what mileage do you travel to work? Well, they've got that with Google anyway, right? All they have to do is track your cell phone or whatever. And then they're going to start sending bills. This is hypothetical on my part, but you're going to receive a monthly or quarterly bill for the excess miles traveled beyond what the standard was for the subdivision you live in and got approved.
And you'll probably see it for your insurance as well.
So I don't know where we're going, but the Big Brother thing bothers me about vehicle miles traveled, because every time I get in my car and drive home from work now, it tells me it's 28 minutes to my home. How does it know every day at 5:30 I'm going to be driving from Fosterville to home, right? Well, I'm patterned, right? They've got me patterned. Same thing if you're driving to church. It tells you so many minutes to church, or the restaurant you go to breakfast in the morning or something. I mean, they get you patterned. They always AI, artificial intelligence and stuff. They get you patterned, and then they see you moving in a certain direction, and they send you a notice as to how long it's going to be. So if they're not monitoring what's going on at that level, I mean, they really are, is the bottom line, right? They're monitoring every movement you make to try to get patterns on you, what kind of buying you do, where you travel, where you eat, where you stop for motel stops. I mean, they're trying to put a complete profile together on everybody who has a cell phone to start dialing into the marketing, number one, but then ultimately the state's going to use it for other purposes, I believe, but we'll see.
Turn your cell phone off.
That might work for some, and for some it doesn't, right? So, anyway, okay, enough on that. Richard.
Just by the way, I left my cell phone home. They don't know what to do.
They're going to tell you how long it's going to take you to get home.
But the media is here, so, I mean, legit.
Like a camera's watching.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, this last month has been kind of a good month relative to good governance. And I'll start out by saying the Planning Commission hearing on the 13th in El Dorado Hills, I think, was really a very positive testament to public interest, concern, and expression thereof. People got the word. Kudos and credits to the people who got the word out, so the public got the word. And I think it's probably been one of the best discussed, best informed, and factual information on a topic that we have seen locally here probably in quite a while. There was some misinformation out there, that the pros and cons of social media can take credit and blame for some of that, but it did generate discussion, and I think more people got a little bit below the first layer because of that. And I think the consequences were readily observed by anybody who went to that meeting over there that evening and heard the public present things, and I thought, frankly, it was a very courteous public as well. And I was quite pleased because of that, because some meetings don't always go that way, and then that detracts really from the sense of quality of the information. And so I think good job, El Dorado Hills citizens. But the Central El Dorado Hills plan is not over yet. There are still more public commission, planning commission meetings. Information will be discussed. Citizens still need to go and listen and hear and make sure that quality matters are being considered. And if they're not, then when this thing goes to a vote, and whether it gets recommended to the Board of Supervisors or not, we need to be aware of this. Showing up for one big meeting isn't what public participation is about. It's paying attention. And I'm talking to the wrong group now, because you all are here and you are paying attention. And I think that's super, but we're a bit outnumbered by the folks who aren't here. Let's all admit that, you know that. But that still has to continue on. And all the way through to the Board of Supervisors finally considering this if it ever gets to them. And it's good to hear that maybe there is some discussion going on between the developer and CSD. But we need to pay attention to CSD. I have not been going to CSD meetings, I will tell you that. I went one night 2 meetings ago, and there were 2 members of the public there. And I'm thinking, you know, this is a pretty significant organization within our community as to how our community functions and what it has to benefit its citizens and programs and everything else. And more of us do need to pay more attention. They may be doing a great job, but that doesn't mean we don't pay attention. And we really can't just give that responsibility up. To change the shift a little bit, on the same day of that planning commission meeting, the Board of Supervisors held a good governance meeting. They've been doing this now, I think, for the third time in about 2 years. And it's kind of interesting, and it's a public meeting because all 5 Board of Supervisors are there, it's posted, and you can attend. But they basically talk about how well they are working as a group and the things that they have undertaken to improve their communication amongst themselves, within the county staff, and also one of the critical issues that they spent a lot of time discussing was how they interact with the public, both in public comment situations, during meetings, as well as constituents, and the difficulties and the benefits that all of that occurs. I won't go into all the details because there's some fine point questions and everything else, but I think it's good credit to the Board of Supervisors to look inwardly like that and see how well they're doing. And unsolicited, I'll make this comment. This whole process of good governance review would not have occurred if it were not for this guy over here. It did not happen before, and it may not happen after. Because I will tell you, sitting in that meeting, I don't think all of the supervisors are particularly thrilled about having that much openness in dealing with all the issues that come up. So, kudos to our supervisor for putting this thing in motion and keeping it in motion, because I think it's very beneficial. And frequently in this document it says, we are concerned about transparency. And if they are truly concerned about transparency, then this kind of activity internally has to keep going on. So enough of that. Really, the next biggest challenge for all of us is starting this week, we're going to be getting ballots, I'm told. Most of us probably got postcards from the registrar telling us how to vote and when to vote and all that stuff. Frankly, I'm glad to get ballots by mail because I think that's the best way to make sure it's in front of you and you get it done and you get it to the county. There's a new process with voting centers, different than polling places in the past. And if you do that, if you go to a polling place or now a voting center, you have to kind of search it out and find it. And the county's got a good website, under elections. There's a lot of good information as to how to vote and when to vote. So shame on us if we don't exercise our vote, if we've taken time to learn about the issues. Because we've created some propositions in this state where people have read the headlines, didn't pay attention to the details, and we are saddled with the consequences as part of our state constitution. And blame us for those mistakes because we're the ones that elect them. So we've got to read this stuff. Now, we're going to have some primary decisions to make for candidates, as well as there is a Measure A on the ballot. And there's a couple different measures depending upon where you live and which particular district that has proposed a bond measure impacts you, and you will only be getting that particular ballot question on your ballot if you live in that particular district. El Dorado Hills, we're going to have a pretty big one, Measure A, relative to school facility financing, and it's a big chunk of money. And I will tell you, I have seen signs about Measure A, but I'm trying to hunt around and find out what all Measure A is going to be spent on. And I think it's between $100 and $120 million. And you know, I think we'd be smart if we paid attention to what they want to spend all their money on. Because that's a lot of money. And it's in a small area, and it's coming out of a smaller group of pockets. And that's the kind of thing I think we should really pay a lot of attention to. So John, those are kind of the several things that I've jotted down for myself to mention and not to run over on. So.
Well, thank you. With that, I'd like to segue to our community happenings in El Dorado Hills, because we also have information on voter center dates and times in El Dorado Hills.
Yes, there's going to be 11-day vote center starting February 22nd. It's February 22nd through March 3rd, and it's going to be from 8:30 in the morning till 4:30 in the afternoon at the California Welcome Center. So that's for 11 days.
Everybody know where that is, downtown center? Okay.
And then starting on February 26th, they're going to have a one-day pop-up vote center, and it's at the Lodge at Four Seasons. They said to check with elections to find out the times for that. And then there's going to be a 4-day vote center from February 29th through March 3rd. There's several of them. One is the El Dorado Hills Library. And, actually there's two. El Dorado Hills Library and the El Dorado Hills Fire Station 85 here in Folsom. So, several different places that you can go to vote.
And there's a Dropbox capability as well. So
at all these, yeah.
Right. There's drop boxes at the voting center, so if you've filled out your mail-out ballot, but you don't want to have to mail it back or whatever, you can drive by one of the vote centers and just drop it in the drop box and you're done. I usually drop mine off at the county prior to this because I didn't want to have to mess around with trying to go to some place to cast a vote or whatever, and mailing it back, I never quite trusted the mail that it was always going to arrive on time. So if I put it in the drop box at the county office, I figure they're going to get it. So, but I think the drop boxes are an advantage for people who don't know how much postage do I have to put on this and all that other stuff that might come up, and it's just easier if you can drop it off at your convenience.
I thought postage was going to be free this year.
It's supposed to be. I mean, it should be, but I hope the mail system treats everything that way. Because we have had mail issues in the past, but you can't assume it's going to be 100% accurate mail they do now. Joel.
Once the ballot is returned to the elections office and it's accepted, that information will be posted on the Secretary of the State's website. So you can go there and see if your ballot has been accepted.
Okay.
You can check on your own ballot?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've done that.
They're not counting the vote, they're just counting that it's come in.
Who submitted their vote?
Yeah, but how do you do that?
So see, there's Big Brother. They know you voted or you didn't. So and they probably would be empty. Don't worry about it.
Yes.
Okay. Other happenings. Let's cover the rest of it.
Coming up this week, election season here at the CSD on this Thursday, the District 1 candidates, all those that are running for the El Dorado Hills District 1, are going to be here starting at 7 o'clock. And then here at the CSD, they're going to continue with their daddy-daughter Valentine's Day dance. And I saw finally, me being a boy, mother of boys, I always wondered why they didn't have a mom and son dance, and they're going to start doing that, but that's in May. First time, but my kids are too old for that. And Valentine's Day, they're going to have the carriage rides at Town Center from 4 to 8. And on February 15th, they're going to have the dedication ceremony for the new Veterans Memorial Bridge and plaque. It's going to be at 11 o'clock. And it's going to be at the footbridge, which crosses New York Creek between Tam O'Shanter and Silva Valley Parkway. So, and then I think that's it. Covered the vote centers. So.
Okay, so I'm going to cover a couple other things for the members who aren't here this evening. I'm going to defer the economic development report until Glenn is able to return and we put something together there. But I would like to cover the healthy communities very quickly. We do have a field trip that's been scheduled, thanks to Cindy. We've got it scheduled through my office for a number of the county officials, county supervisors, City of Placerville, county council members, city manager, to go up to the 14 Ford facility in Marysville and actually understand what they're doing for the homeless. And I think it's 14 tough sheds that have been set up with housing, temporary housing basically for the homeless, but yet they bring the services in from the county and make sure that everybody who is eligible for services gets registered with the Health and Human Services Agency or the Veterans Commission or whoever it is that they can possibly get benefits from to help pay for the cost of some of these things. But they're starting training services at that same site. So giving vocational training for the homeless who are able to learn and still do things, but lack a skill that's of high value, carpentry, some kind of a welding capability, certificate for welding, culinary arts, whatever it is. So they're starting to train some of the homeless to give them the skill set to be able to go out and get a stable job and hold down a job. Of course, along with that means you have to have transportation. So unless you live in an area that has transit service or something or other, I doubt if very many people are calling Uber to get the ride to work and the ride home. So there's still a dependency there in terms of how do you get back and forth, which is a typical thing you have to try to find some solutions for. But anyway, that field trip is basically an all-day event. We have a number of different people going from nonprofits. We have representation from both political parties going. So this is part of the coalition that's been established to try to find local solutions for our homeless situation in El Dorado County. That's the focus of it. So looking forward to doing that. And again, thanks to Cindy for putting in all the time trying to schedule it and coordinate it, because that turned out to be quite a big effort. The last one I want to touch bases on is the infrastructure, since John Maney's not here. The Bass Lake Road Bridlewood entrance evaluation. And for any of you who live out there, I actually have copies available of the proposed solution. But this is what we're going to start with. So this is an area map, obviously, of Bass Lake and where we are in Bass Lake Road. The Bridlewood intersection with Bass Lake Road is where John's pointing out there. That's the area that's been focused on improvement. If you go down to the bottom here, that is the proposed J7 development that Parker has. So they're going to have a new entry out on Bass Lake Road. And so one of the tips that our Department of Transportation looked at is how do we solve both of those situations. And the J7 was supposed to be a right in, right out, as I understood it, which is not the best of circumstances. But the county DOT looked at solutions for both of those initially, and then they looked at a solution for Bridlewood, both of which were left turning lanes and other things at huge cost. Yeah, and so here's some of the examples of what's out there. So yeah, just keep going to the reality of Bass Lake Road.
And that's looking back from J6, where's J7 right here, Bridlewood's right there. And then this is actually, this is what the two less for the DOT proposed.
Okay. So this is one of the solution sets they had, but this was a huge cost, and the county didn't have money set aside in part of our CIP program to pay for it, nor could you ask a developer to pay the full cost of it, nor could you reasonably ask anybody else to pay the cost. So that was kind of discounted as, yeah, it's nice, but it's too expensive, and we don't see where we get the money for it. And then there was a local solution that looked at what do you do in between if you just dealt with Bridlewood. And then this is the ultimate conceptual layout of what's being proposed by DOT, which I think has huge advantages that address a lot of things. This is the one the map I've got copies of if anybody would like a copy to take home if they live in that area. But the idea is you put in a roundabout. And the roundabout has multiple purposes, because what it means is if you're coming out of J7 and you're trying to go to Highway 50 and you have a right turn exit only, you come out, you come to the roundabout, loop around, you're right back out to Highway 50. So it's a very short distance between J7, the new subdivision, and where this roundabout is. So that provides ease of safely getting around. It also provides ease of people in Bridlewood to get in and out, because that roundabout will obviously facilitate going around and coming in and out. And the primary advantage overall is that when you put in roundabouts, two major advantages. One is it slows traffic down. You can't go 65 miles an hour through a roundabout. You're going to have to slow down to 35 or something. So that is a traffic calming measure in areas where you have very poor visibility, but it also provides the turning capability. The second major aspect of the roundabouts is that there is a lot of state grant monies available to pay for roundabouts, because of the air quality benefits primarily, because they look at it, if you keep traffic moving, which is what a roundabout does, there's very few pauses typically in a well-designed roundabout where people can't get on the roundabout. They're waiting in queue to get on the roundabout, but if there's very low traffic, you just go on the roundabout, loop around, as opposed to coming to a stop sign, sitting there, looking in both directions, seeing somebody coming to 65 miles an hour and saying, I can't get out there. Again, so that's another major benefit of it. So actually you'll see the dotted line up above, because the property on the top of this map is actually the El Dorado Hills Community Services District Regional Park at Bass Lake. The 210 acres they're trying to acquire, and the county just recently negotiated the sale of the 41.7 acres. The county had out there $250,000 was the price. That was the appraisal. All that's recorded down and it's been covered by the Board of Supervisors meeting. But that carve out there is the right of way that's been preserved. If the roundabout is decided to move forward, that the county doesn't have to turn around and buy right of way rights from the CSD to put in this turn circle. So that carve out accommodates the right of way as part of the negotiation, so there's no additional cost to do that. And ultimately, what I think is going to happen is we're going to have a fourth leg on this roundabout. If this moves forward, there would be the entrance to the back parking lot that the CSD has proposed in the Bass Lake area. It's a perfect setup. And people coming out of the park will be able to get on the roundabout. They can go north or east or west, basically, on Bass Lake Road. So I think there's some huge benefits from this kind of a conceptual approach. And the primary one, I guess, that drives more than anything is in talking to our director of DOT, he thinks he can get 80 to 90% of the $2.3 million cost for this in grant funds. Because again, the state will fund turn circles, they'll fund bike paths, but they won't fund normal improvements on roadways. They require the county to do that through a TIM fee program or something like that. So this has got huge benefits right now, and to put it in place now would be, I think, a substantial improvement, recognizing that when and if Bass Lake goes to 4 lanes, a lot of this infrastructure will have to change. But I look at it as getting our state money back on a grant that solves a problem for maybe the next 10 to 15, 20 years, whatever it's going to be. And we're getting our money back applied to where we need it, as opposed to going to some other county because they're applying for roundabout funding and we're not getting it. So it's a trade-off, right? So it isn't the ultimate solution, but I think it's a relatively near-term solution. And so we're trying to present this to the public, let them view it, think about it. I've had really good experiences in roundabouts in California, in various places, and also in various other, Hawaii's got a lot of roundabouts. They work very efficiently. There's a roundabout over on Highway 20 that goes out that works very efficiently. So if they're designed right and you have the proper ADT, average daily travel, for the roundabout, it's a very effective way to keep cars moving that a lot of people in California don't understand and don't necessarily want to experience. But I think it's coming of age. And so we're right now, Caltrans is putting a roundabout in up on Highway 50. And Highway 89, well, they haven't completed it yet. It's still in construction, but they're putting it in. The county is now talking about a roundabout Highway 50 and Pioneer Trail to kind of complement that, to solve all the problems we've had at Pioneer Trail.
What's that 50, that's in?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, 89.
It's 89, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, the one at Myers, the Myers.
Okay, I was told they hadn't finished up all the final segment, but if it's done, well, I haven't been up there for 3 months, so maybe it is done now, but I'm hoping that experience and people driving through that say, hey, these roundabouts are kind of neat once you get used to them, right? You have to get used to looking where people are coming on and going off and kind of timing things, slowing down a little bit to get in the right timing. But it isn't that difficult to learn how to drive a roundabout.
Part of the challenge is that it does take more space, so right away is an issue.
Right.
And so I'm not here to take over a meeting, but I think I'm about to take over a meeting.
But
so I'm the vice president of the Bass Lake Action Committee. We had concerns about this. We've been promised improvements in the Bass Lake area for 25 years. I've been there for 25 years. When J7 came out this year, we noticed that, hey, they're not going to require the developer to build the frontage improvements for the road. The reason is because none of these projects trigger the 4-lane alignment. They don't want to put any improvements in until there's the 4-lane alignment. Why would you build it twice? And that makes sense. And that's responsible use of tax dollars. But so we sent a letter in August to Raphael, and we said, hey, if you're saying it's never going to happen, because they're saying that the projected max, daily traffic volumes are about 12,000 cars, and that doesn't mean any trigger for anything. So if you're not going to build 4 lanes like we've been talking about, there are no turn pockets into the subdivisions, and there are 4 of them on there now. Silver Spring's coming up soon, Bass Lake Estates later. What about a roundabout? Well, we don't know if that's a good solution. There's a lot of people that hate it. There's a lot of people who wonder why we haven't done it, but if it's a solution and you can get that grant funding, why not consider it? If it's an improvement that we're not going to get otherwise, let's explore it. Well, we didn't hear anything about it from August, and then in January, Raphael asked us to come up and talk to him and said, hey, how about a roundabout? So, Ron Cassidy, he's on the HOA for Bridal Canyon. We talked to him. Ron and I went up there. Ron's also director at large for Bass Lake Action. And we talked to John Kaling and to Raphael, and there's some things that need to happen here with that. One is that my major concern is like, hey, let's explore this. I mean, this looks like a win, right? If we can't get anything else, we'll take it. there's some opportunities to put some crosswalks in here for the future park that, there are no pedestrian facilities for bikes or walking sidewalks, anything in this community. They're only surrounded J6, that's it. So, we want to explore it. Well, one of the things that we talked about is that Raphael says based on the vehicle trips, it's probably not going to qualify for a grant fund unless there's some community seed involved. And to that end, they asked Ron if he would talk to the right-of-way homeowners to see if they'd be interested in assessing themselves some dollars every year per parcel to pay for part of it. And then he thought he could probably go to the developer and get $300,000 out of them. So Ron talked to his board. They seem to be generally in favor of it. We talked about, I think the initial thing they said to us was $50 per home per year for 5 years. And this, this is a community benefit. The right-of-way residents would be funding it, mostly.
Well, mostly it'd be the state grant.
Well, that, but I mean, out of the community right now, the burden is being, borne by those residents there. Now, Ron suggested maybe higher per year for a shorter term, like 100 per parcel for 3 years. They seemed pretty receptive, but they wanted to know if there was some buy-in. So that's where we left it. We really haven't heard anything else back. We also discussed, hey, because the CSD is doing this and they're doing a traffic impact study for the park, they want pedestrian connectivity. Where I'm at, farther up the hill or on this curve, there are no sidewalks. There's a sidewalk inside our community. There's not a sidewalk out of our community. There's not a sidewalk at Woodridge along here. There's not a sidewalk anywhere along Bridlewood Canyon. You can't get over the overflow. There's only sidewalks. So we said, well, is there grant funding for sidewalks and bicycle lanes? Because I know there are. Why would you not pursue that? Let's talk to the CSD. Let's see if they can get some funding separate from what maybe the county can chase down as a community service district, maybe from a recreation aspect. So, but those conversations haven't happened. And I'm sitting next to Mike. There is, it's one of the things I was wondering. Hey, how does a fire truck go through this?
It has to be at the right turning radius.
Yeah,
it has to be basically a tapered shoulder and nothing in the middle of the right of way. So if a truck pulls up on the top, nothing gets damaged, right?
Yeah, but that's the thing too. Like in J7, their taper was a 20-foot taper, and Commissioner Vega asked, why isn't it a 100-foot taper? You have the room for it. They did a 20-foot at J6 on Bass Lake Road. And so 100 foot is what they asked for. I noticed they flagged it, so there's room. We measured with satellite tools. There's enough room. So there's still a lot of questions. This looks like a wonderful solution to us, but then the question is, what are the impact? If this is the roundabout here, there's a driveway 400 feet away here, there's a driveway 700 feet away here, there's a new intersection coming down 400 feet away here. J6 is right here, and this is all within 1,000 feet. So what does that do to your transportation models? This is the north-south connector in the county. We can bring value in.
In fact, the traffic is slowed down, makes it a whole lot better than what it is
sometimes. Well, but if you slow it down, what does that do to the traffic and the impacts elsewhere? We have a concern about Silver Springs, which we've been waiting for since 1980-something, to connect, where it comes through here. And, there's going to be no improvement on Bass Lake Road to the north and to the east. But what is that going to do to the Woodridge residents at Madera? It's 400-something feet away. There's going to be stop and starting. Those people have to turn left to get out of there. There's a left turn lane into Madera. There's not a left turn lane out of Madera. So there's 300-something houses in there. How many is it? 330. 330. There's 300 in my neighborhood back here. Yeah, it's my house. And there's another 30 coming here. There's 300 coming up here for social. So all these things, this is a great proposal, but has this been analyzed? And we want to make sure that we're not just going to.
This is conceptual at this point.
Yeah.
I didn't say it's been fully analyzed.
Well, no, but that's sort of So we want to get excited, but we want to make sure we're doing the right things, and that when they analyze it, because we had concerns about the off ramp at Bass Lake with the traffic light.
Yep.
That was supposed to be a full interchange improvement, but now it's been piecemealed out, so it's just a traffic light, that $1.2 million project. I was supposed to have 2 lanes under the highway to get people off the freeway, because I was backed up past the Buffaloes the other day. So if we're doing just a light, is that the right solution right now? I mean, I know it's more money, but should we be looking at maybe a bigger solution for that to mitigate these traffic effects? So, you know what, I'm thrilled that this has been presented to us. I don't know if people love roundabouts or hate them. If we can get something, I pulled people out of overturned cars. My wife was in a head-on collision in Bass Lake Road with my daughter last year in March. So, anything that could make an improvement, let's explore it. If there's a way to fund it, let's do it, but let's make sure it's analyzed and studied right. And that's your meeting, John, sorry.
No, that was fine. That was a good editorial about some of the consequences. We don't want unintended consequences. This has to be fully analyzed. It's got to be socialized with the community out in Bass Lake so everybody understands it. I mean, maybe it becomes a series of roundabouts to try to deal with each of these issues ultimately.
Silver Springs is during the construction this year with Lone Dorado.
Unfortunately, in my opinion, DOT has not done an adequate job of capturing a vision of what needs to happen in some of these places, and they've been using pretty much standards, and then there's conditions on projects, and then for whatever reason the condition gets lost or gets waived or whatever. And so we're now trying to get more accountability when it is a condition before the final maps and stuff are issued. Did all those conditions get implemented? If not, what is the commitment to make sure they happen? Because we need to have those kinds of check sheets, because for whatever reason the stuff gets sifted out somewhere.
When we sat down with John Raphael, we mentioned the interchange and the improvements there, and you know how part of the interchange project has now been pulled out and put onto the Country Club Drive realignment, and the signal interchange off-ramp thing is its own thing now. And we mentioned, well, hey, you know, the Bass Lake Hills Pacific Plan, those 4 projects right now, Phase 1A and Phase 2, they're conditioned for the interchange improvements, as long as they hit those triggers. And Raphael and John both told me, no, they haven't. I said, what? Well, they'll never hit that metric with what's approved. It'll be another project later, and so that means Market Valley. So,
right. So some of the stuff you really have to fully understand. When is it really? But
as it was presented to the public, was that hey, these projects are going to build the interchange. The reality is these projects will write a check for TIM fees, and someday something will have to interchange.
What I noticed in New Zealand when I visited there, they have a lot of roundabouts, but it's not in heavily populated areas.
Right.
Because I think it would cause.
Well, there's a limit in terms of EDCs and where roundabout works and where it doesn't.
They're concerned about 12,000 cars a day with that roundabout. They think it's just at the cusp of what's a good service and what maybe might need to be improved later. But if those numbers, like they're saying now, projections are that those numbers aren't ever going to be real, even though they're projected 20 years, 30 years ago to be real. Now they don't think they're going to happen. So yeah, to your credit, when you're in a smaller, we're in Hawaii. When I was in Hawaii, they had a roundabout in last June that hasn't been there in the 20 years I've been going there, and it worked. You know, it's Hawaiian time too.
They're
but
beautiful, and they make the roundabouts beautiful. They really do.
So now, but if you have a 4-lane roundabout like in London or okay, that's.
Anything more than 1 lane gets a little complicated.
It's not in heavily populated areas. It's not in.
But the county does have a consultant that's done like 12 years of roundabout designs that we would go to get their professional opinions, size it right, determine what has to happen with the walkways or pedestrian crossings, what do you do for bicycle stuff, and try to put together an integrated plan if this concept moves forward.
I would love to hear
But the first level is buy-in from people who think that it's a valuable concept.
And right now, the primary buy-in would be those residents of Bradley Canyon because they'll be writing a check. So it sounds like their board's in favor of it, but getting 300-something residents to sign off on that's another thing. So hopefully...
That's an ask, I understand,
yes.
It's a big ask.
So hopefully, I mean, they will see the benefit of it immediately, get the benefits to the entire community. I would love to spread that out and spread the pain out. I don't know how you get that approved. Because I know residents in my neighborhood, 278 people, they go, well, that's their...
You create a zone of benefit, but most of the time when it gets much beyond the immediate impact area,
it's a tough zone to
people
begin
don't want
with.
to,
And to spread it, I would love to spread the pain out, but oh well.
And what I also noticed is there were no crosswalks at a roundabout. That would be difficult.
Not to contradict, I lived in New Jersey for 5 years. I lived in a development just off a numbered state highway that was fully developed along the entire thing. And there were a number of roundabouts. And the beauty of it was traffic was slower, but it never stopped. And also you start to learn how to drive using the roundabouts. So it does affect driving behaviors, and it does affect people able to get in and out and feel like they have their turn and they don't have to dart. And they're great things. Well, they were good things where I lived at that time.
Yeah.
So if there's a positive, let's put it positive.
I think it's adaptability too.
We went to Sedona, Arizona, and they've got roundabouts that have 2 exit lanes off the roundabout and another entrance lane. So they've gotten very, very detailed in the way these things are designed. And everything we saw in our experience, it flowed really well. And there was no confusion once you got used to what it was, right?
Yeah. They're roundabouts in Roseville. So
Well, they're up in California, north of Truckee.
Yep.
When you go out towards Gray Eagle, those areas, there's 3 of them in there, they work perfectly well for that level of traffic because it keeps the traffic moving. And everybody kind of knows their turn and their roundabout. So there's a lot of advantages, but they have to be sized properly, they have to be designed properly to accommodate pedestrians and other things. But if all those are considered and it's still a good project, then I think it's beneficial improvement. You're not going to get any other way.
Yeah, we're not against the
I think the Portland's in Sacramento.
Oh, yeah, we're different.
Anyway, off on roundabout. So with that, I want to move to council member items real quickly. Our next meeting is Monday, March the 2nd. And I'm trying to get a guest speaker that will be able to talk about our Elrose voting centers to kind of follow up, because March 2nd is the day before the election. And make sure that people know that if they haven't voted yet, here's a drop box you can go vote. Here's a place where you can go and actually access the machine and do your voting.
Can I bring the drop box here?
We haven't talked about that, but maybe.
Might be a conflict, right?
It might be for me to do that. But the CSD could do it probably, working with us, because we've had, I think, very good collaborative results working with the Community Services District on a number of different things. And so that might be the next extension of it. But, so I'm still trying to find the right person to be the guest speaker. I had one person lined up, and it turns out they can't be here that evening, so I'm looking at some other alternatives. But we'll come up with something.
It might be a little busy.
Just a little, right? In preparation for, okay, now the real voting happens for the most part. Because a lot of people are going to probably wait till the day of the election to decide to vote. I don't know why, but that's the way sometimes it works, right? Last minute, oh, today's voting day? Okay. So anyway, that's it. So hopefully we'll see you back in March. And have a wonderful month of February till we get to there.